Fotheringhay Castle, the 8th of February, 1587. The air is cold, damp, still. A young woman in a black velvet gown steps onto a wooden scaffold. Her hands are steady, her spine unshaken. She is only 25, but her eyes belong to someone much older, someone who has lived through betrayals, wars, and the slow decay of hope. She kneels beside a block of oak, places her head upon it, and whispers a final prayer in Latin. Moments later, the executioner raises his axe. It takes 2 strikes. The crowd gasps, blood pools, and with it ends the life of Mary, Queen of Scots. She was born into a crown, crowned at just 6 days old, married into one kingdom at 12, widowed at 18, and hunted by another queen before she was old enough to rule on her own terms. Her story is not one of triumph. It's one of tragedy, of beauty turned into suspicion, of power turned into prison, of a young woman caught between empires, faiths, and a cousin who saw her not as family but as a threat. She was called many things: Queen of Scotland, Queen of France, rightful heir to England, but in the end she was called a traitor. History remembers Elizabeth I as the Virgin Queen, but in Mary she saw the mirror she could never break. A mirror with a crown, a womb, and a claim. So why was Mary executed? Was she guilty of treason, or simply too royal for her own good? This is Dark Queens, and this is the story of the girl who wore a crown before she could speak and lost her head before she found peace. She was born into chaos. On the 8th of December, 1542, Mary Stuart came into the world as the only surviving child of King James V of Scotland. Just 6 days later, her father was dead, broken by defeat at the hands of the English and consumed by sickness and despair. As legend tells it, his final words were bitter. It came with a lass, and it will go with a lass, a prophecy, a curse, or perhaps a warning. The crown passed to Mary before she could even open her eyes. At 6 days old, she was Queen of Scotland, an infant monarch in a kingdom torn by war, religion, and the ever-looming shadow of England. Scotland was a battlefield of belief. Catholic and Protestant, Highlander and Lowlander, clan against clan, and in the cradle of all this tension sat a baby girl with a crown too heavy for her head. Her mother, Mary of Guise, a French noblewoman and fierce political player, took control as regent. She knew her daughter's survival depended on more than prayers. It depended on alliance. So, at just 5 years old, Mary was sent to France, betrothed to the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne. There, she was raised not as a warrior queen, but as a Renaissance princess, fluent in Latin, skilled in poetry, music, dance, and diplomacy. She wore silk. She studied statecraft. She grew into one of the most educated and elegant women of her generation. At age 12, she married Francis, heir to the French throne. At 15, she became Queen of France. For a moment, Mary was not just a queen of one country, but two: Scotland by blood, France by marriage. And through her Tudor lineage, through her grandmother Margaret, sister of Henry VIII, Mary had a distant but undeniable claim to the throne of England as well. 3 crowns, 1 girl. But fate was not finished with her. At 16, Francis II died suddenly from an ear infection gone septic. And just like that, Mary was a widow, a foreign queen in a court that no longer needed her. Catherine de' Medici, her mother-in-law, saw no reason to keep the young widow at court. France turned cold. Scotland called her home. And so, at the age of 18, Mary returned to her storm-ridden homeland. She had been away for over a decade. She spoke French more fluently than Scots. She had lived in palaces, learned under philosophers, dined with kings. Now, she would rule a country that had changed while she was gone, a country that no longer recognized her voice, her faith, or her face. But Mary did not return to be anyone's puppet. She came home as a queen, and soon as a danger. Mary landed on Scottish soil in 1561, cloaked in black, a widow, a queen, and to many, a stranger. She was 18 years old, fresh from the opulence of the French court, where art, poetry, and politics flowed like wine. Now, she returned to Edinburgh dark, grey and grim. The palace smelled of damp stone and iron. The court was smaller, rougher, suspicious. Scotland was no longer the Catholic country she had left. During her absence, the Protestant Reformation had swept through with force. Led by the firebrand preacher John Knox, a movement had grown that saw Rome as the enemy and Mary, a Catholic monarch raised in France, as a dangerous symbol. John Knox didn't mince words. In his sermons, he thundered that no woman should rule, that Mary's Mass was idolatry, that her rule would bring God's wrath. He called her a Jezebel, a harlot, a threat to God's will. Mary did not fight him openly. Not yet. She took a different path. She held Protestant advisers close. She allowed the Reformation Parliament to stand. She even attended public events that showed tolerance. But behind palace doors, she kept her Catholic chapel active. She prayed in Latin. She refused to renounce the Pope. To many, that was enough to paint her as a danger. Still, Mary tried to govern with grace. She was intelligent, charismatic, and politically sharp. Letters from foreign ambassadors describe her as charming, composed, and deeply thoughtful. She rode horses like a man, hunted like a noble, spoke several languages, and knew how to make allies with a glance. But Scotland was not France, and its nobles were not easy to charm. They resented her, some because she was Catholic, others because she was French, but most because she was powerful and unmarried. And so the pressure began. She needed to remarry, to produce an heir, to stabilize her fragile throne. Every European court had suggestions: Spain, Austria, Denmark. Even her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England, offered a husband, a Protestant courtier named Robert Dudley, Elizabeth's own favorite, whom she would never marry herself. Mary declined. Instead, in 1565, she chose Henry Stuart Lord Darnley. He was tall, handsome, and crucially, shared her Tudor blood. Their union strengthened her claim to the English throne, and for a brief moment, it seemed like a fairy tale. But fairy tales rot quickly in the cold. Darnley was vain, ambitious, and arrogant. He wanted the crown matrimonial equal status as king, but Mary refused. He began drinking, consorting with enemies, and embarrassing her at court. Their marriage soured within months. Then came the murder. In 1566, Mary's private secretary, David Rizzio, was dragged from her supper chamber and stabbed over 50 times right in front of her pregnant body. The attackers were Protestant lords, likely supported by Darnley himself. Mary was traumatized, but she did not break. She gave birth to a son, James, just months later. And then, in the darkest twist, Darnley himself was found dead, blown up in a house, strangled in a garden. Suspicion swirled, whispers spread, and at the center of them all, Mary. Some believed she was complicit. Others blamed James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a powerful noble who soon took center stage in her life and in history. In less than a year, Mary would be married again, to Bothwell, her late husband's suspected murderer, and Scotland would never forgive her for it. When Mary married the Earl of Bothwell, Scotland gasped and then turned. Bothwell was no prince. He was rough, twice divorced, and infamous for ambition as much as violence. Even worse, many believed he had kidnapped Mary and forced her into marriage. Some say it was rape. Others say she consented. The truth, lost in the smoke. But the optics were fatal. A queen still, stained by the mysterious death of her second husband now, married to his suspected killer. To the Protestant lords, it was the final insult. To the people, it was proof she had lost her mind. Or worse, her morals. Just 3 months after the wedding, a group of powerful Scottish nobles rose up in rebellion. They formed an army and marched toward Mary. She met them at Carberry Hill, not in war, but in negotiation. There was no bloodshed, no glory, only surrender. They arrested Bothwell and sent him into exile, where he would die years later, insane, in a Danish prison cell. As for Mary, they took her son baby James and forced her to abdicate the throne in his name. A queen no more. She was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle, a grey, lonely fortress on an island surrounded by mist. There she miscarried twins. There she signed away her crown. There she waited forgotten. But Mary was not finished. In 1568, after 11 months in captivity, she escaped. Disguised as a washerwoman, she fled across the lake, raised a small army, and tried to reclaim her throne. But the battle at Langside ended her hopes. Her forces were crushed, her allies scattered, and so she made a desperate choice. She fled south across the border into England, into the arms of Elizabeth I. It was a decision that would seal her fate. Mary believed Elizabeth, her cousin, would offer sanctuary. After all, weren't they both queens, both women in a world of male knives, both rightful rulers in their own lands? But Elizabeth didn't see a cousin. She saw a threat. Mary was a Catholic, a symbol, a rallying point for rebellion. Her very presence could inspire English Catholics to rise up against Elizabeth's Protestant rule. Worse, Mary still claimed to be the rightful Queen of England through her Tudor bloodline, uninterrupted by scandal or parliament. Elizabeth couldn't allow her to roam free. So Mary was not welcomed, she was detained. What followed was not days, not weeks, not months, but 18 years. Mary was moved from castle to castle, manor to manor, always under guard. She wrote letters, pleaded for audiences, sewed elaborate tapestries, a queen reduced to embroidery and silence. Yet even in confinement, she remained dangerous. Plots bloomed in her name, some real, some imagined. English spies intercepted letters, decoded secret messages, fabricated threats, and eventually they found what they needed or claimed to. The Babington Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne. The evidence? Letters in cipher, a trail that led perhaps deliberately to Mary's cell. Whether she truly conspired remains debated, but to Elizabeth's advisors, it was enough. They had the proof, they had the Queen. Now they wanted her head. The trial was a formality. Held at Fotheringhay Castle in 1586, Mary stood before a panel of 40 English nobles and judges. She was not allowed legal counsel. She wasn't permitted to see the evidence against her. The letters allegedly linking her to the Babington Plot were intercepted, decoded, and some suspect doctored. But it didn't matter. She was guilty the moment she crossed into England. Mary spoke with poise. She denied the accusations. She questioned the legality of being tried as a foreign sovereign. She declared herself a Quinaut, a subject. "I am the daughter of a king, and I fear no death," she said. And yet, the sentence came anyway. Death by beheading. Even Elizabeth hesitated. For weeks, she delayed signing the warrant. To kill Mary was to kill a fellow monarch, a cousin, a woman, but her counsel was relentless. The risk was too great, the precedent too important. If Mary lived, rebellion would follow. And so, Elizabeth signed. But she made sure the execution was carried out in secret, so secret, in fact, that when the news finally reached her, she claimed surprise and sorrow. Whether it was guilt or performance, history leaves unclear. What is clear is what happened on the morning of the 8th of February, 1587. Mary dressed carefully. She wore a black velvet gown with a crimson petticoat beneath the color of martyrdom. Her long auburn hair had grayed during captivity, but her bearing remained regal. She walked calmly into the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle, where the block awaited. Witnesses later said she showed more dignity than anyone in the room. She forgave the executioner. She knelt. She placed her head upon the block and uttered her final words. In manus tuas, Domini, commendo spiritum meum. Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. The first strike missed the neck cutting into the back of her head. The second blow finished it. And when the executioner lifted her head, something shocking happened. The auburn hair came loose. It was a wig. The head of Mary, Queen of Scots, tumbled to the ground, revealing short, grey hair beneath. Time had already taken her before the axe did. Her little dog, hiding beneath her skirts, emerged and refused to leave the body. Mary was gone, but her death echoed far beyond the walls of that castle. Catholics across Europe mourned her as a martyr. Protestants viewed it as a necessary purge. Elizabeth faced backlash even from allies. And in Spain, King Philip II found his final justification to launch the Spanish Armada against England the following year. Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, whom she hadn't seen since he was a baby, eventually became king of both Scotland and England after Elizabeth's death. In the end, Mary's blood paved the way for her son's crown. A queen in life, a pawn in politics, a martyr in death. History has always struggled with Mary. Was she foolish or fearless, reckless or merely human? Some say she was a romantic too soft for the hard world of statecraft. Others claim she was manipulative, dangerous, a threat to Protestant order. But what cannot be denied is this: Mary was a woman raised to be a queen, in a world that never intended to let her rule. She was crowned before she could walk, married before she could love, condemned before she could choose. Her greatest crimes were not betrayal or treason, but being born royal, being Catholic, and daring to claim what was hers. While Elizabeth I reigned with caution and cunning, Mary lived with fire in her chest and thorns at her feet. She followed her heart into war, into scandal, into ruin, and yet she never stopped believing she was meant to rule. That belief got her killed, but it also carried her name into legend. Today, her letters survive, full of poetry, sorrow, strength. Her death mask still rests in museums. Her image appears in paintings, plays, and songs. And her story of a girl queen brought down by politics, patriarchy, and power refuses to die. Ironically, it was not Elizabeth, but Mary's son James, who would unite the thrones of Scotland and England. Mary lost her head, but in the end her bloodline won the crown. Perhaps that is her greatest revenge. So, how should we remember her? As a tragic heroine, a political failure, a foolish queen, or maybe as a woman who dared to rule in a time that only made room for kings? This was her story. This was her fire. And like all dark queens, she was made of more than myth. She was made of blood,